Greetings. In this video, I'm going to discuss positioning your left hand wrist, or more specifically your fretting hand, in case you're left-handed or have some other weird problem like that. Now, what I would recommend is to have a very straight wrist. And I'm going to give us what's called a body memory exercise because it helps us to internalize and retain the principle of why we do this. I'm not just going to tell you what to do, but why. So here we go. Try holding up that left hand and just wiggle your fingers, okay? Nice and loose. Now bend that wrist as far as it'll go and wiggle your fingers. And go ahead and go back and forth a couple of times. And I want you to think about the difference between those two. Now there's kind of two major differences. One is you should feel a difference in how much effort it takes to move those fingers. One is going to feel kind of lighter and easier. And one's going to feel like there's like water resisting your fingers. Like there's just kind of more resistance to that movement. And the other difference is going to be you'll feel a tension difference somewhere in your wrist. I feel it the most like right here on the top of the back of my hand. Oh my gosh, this angle's weird. Okay, so sometimes this exercise is undermined by the fact that someone's played like this their whole life and their body's very used to it. But generally, this has less tension and this has more tension. And here's the physiological reason why. Your tendons that move your fingers are predominantly starting down here and coming up here. So we have a muscle down here that ends in a tendon, and then that tendon goes up through your carpal tunnels and into different places in your hands. So some connect further up, some connect even further out toward the end of your fingers, and some all the way in that last little segment of your finger. So muscle, which ends in tendon, which goes through your carpal tunnel and into your hand. So a lot of this finger movement, if you try putting your hand on your forearm and you move your fingers around, you're going to feel those muscles undulating. That's because most of that movement is coming from your forearm, although there are muscles in your hands as well. So it's pretty stinking complicated. But these tendons, when your wrist is straight, they're unimpacted. So when I bend my wrist, now those tendons, they get stretched a little bit further, and they also are now curling over. How do I get the angle? They're curling over and having to rub against the inside of those carpal tunnels. And also, I've read, I don't know if this is true, but I've read that carpal tunnels are like a straw. Okay, so you have this tube, and when you bend that straw, it collapses, right? If you had a thread and you're running it through a straight straw, it's going to go right through. But if you bend that straw, all of a sudden there's a crease. And now that string doesn't want to move through because it's having to slip through this really tight crease. Well, your carpal tunnels are kind of like that too. They probably don't crease as dramatically as a straw, but they're going to fold over, and you're going to be rubbing your tendon against both sides of that carpal tunnel. That's why people who type like this, they're actually bending it the opposite way that guitarists usually bend it, but their tendon is coming straight, and then it rubs against the backs of or tops of their carpal tunnels and then into their hands. And that's why they try to get people to lift their wrists up when they type so that they're not rubbing those tendons against their carpal tunnels. That kind of wear on your tendons and on your carpal tunnels takes a very long time to be healed and restored. So we really want to avoid that kind of thing. When we're playing guitar, it's really, really easy to wrench that wrist. But it's pretty unnecessary. If we curl our fingertips enough, that's one reason why we really like to curl our fingertips, is because it helps me to keep a very straight wrist. Here's a G chord, and my wrist is really straight. Here's a G chord where my wrist is really bent over. And you can see, ooh, I'm in drop D. And that's even a little out of tune. But I get all 6 strings to sound out really nice and clear, even with a straight wrist. Even here, I've got a straight wrist, and I've got, no strings getting muted. So it's definitely doable. But it takes learning it and making that your default way of playing. So I would encourage you, when you catch yourself playing with a wrist like this, to do that little exercise. And the reason being that it creates a body memory of why we want to have a straight wrist, because we can feel that this is literally easier. It's literally easier to move my fingers around and play guitar when my wrist is straight than here where there's more resistance and it takes more effort. In addition, this is rubbing your tendons against your carpal tunnels and doing some wear and tear, which we don't want. So if you do this exercise, you start to become more and more aware of that physical sensation. And then when you're playing guitar and you start to really wrench that wrist, you all of a sudden notice it more because you've done the work to train your brain to recognize that feeling. So I would encourage you to do that exercise and to work on your technique. It's something that can take, weeks or even months to really work out of your playing. But if you do, you'll be glad you did. It'll make it easier to play. Thank you for watching, and I hope this is helpful.